The misunderstood observer picture a child sitting alone at the edge of the playground, not crying, not excluded, just watching. The swings move like pendulums, voices overlap in chaotic harmony, the world spins at full volume. And this child, they're absorbing everything. People see this and think lonely, shy, struggling to fit in. But here's what they're actually witnessing: a mind at work, because the quiet child isn't empty. They're full overflowing with observations, questions, and understanding that has no words yet. The myth of silence. As absence, we've built a world that measures value by volume. How quickly you respond, how confidently you speak, how much space you fill in a room. In this world, quiet gets mistaken for empty. Stillness gets confused with disconnection. But silence isn't absence. It's presence in a different frequency. The quiet child is listening not to respond, not to perform, but to understand. And that kind of listening creates a depth most people never access. Why some children choose quiet? Sometimes it's wiring. Some nervous systems are built for low stimulation. They find peace in stillness the way others find it in noise. But sometimes quiet is learned in homes where speaking up brought criticism, where emotions were too much, where questions were burdens instead of curiosity. The child learned silence is safer than risk. In classrooms that reward speed over thought, the quiet child's careful consideration gets labeled as slow or disengaged. Their depth gets mistaken for deficiency, so they adapt, they withdraw, not because they have nothing to say, but because the world moves too fast for the kind of thinking they do. The gift nobody recognizes. Here's what people miss about quiet children. They see everything. While others rush to speak, they notice who gets left out, the micro-expression of hurt on someone's face. How a teacher's tone shifts when a student struggles, the patterns everyone else overlooks, they collect. Observations like precious stones, and later, those stones become poetry, scientific theories, innovations, art. Think about the creators who changed the world. Many started as watchers, not talkers. In their silence, they learned to see nuance, to test ideas internally before sharing them, to understand the world's texture before trying to reshape it. Quietness isn't a deficit. It's a different form of genius. The social economy that punishes depth, but we live in a world designed for immediacy. Classrooms reward the first hand raised. Meetings favor the quickest response. Social currency is measured in likes, comments, visibility, and the quiet child. They're operating in a system built against their natural rhythm. They internalize a devastating message: you must be louder to matter. So some mask their nature. They learn extroverted scripts, perform enthusiasm they don't feel, drain themselves, trying to be someone they're not. Others withdraw further, convinced the world will never slow down enough to meet them where they are. What starts as self-protection becomes a lifelong negotiation between authenticity and acceptance. The invisible cost. Here's something we don't talk about enough. Quiet children are often labeled easy, well-behaved, obedient, no trouble. And because they're easy, they get overlooked. Attention in families and schools often goes to whoever demands it loudest. The child who shouts gets heard first. The child who whispers waits and waits and waits. Over time, they learn that their needs are optional, that asking for help is an imposition, that their voice is less important than their silence. This creates a dangerous pattern: expecting less, asking less, becoming less. The apology becomes automatic. Sorry to bother you, before they've even spoken. And that apology, it becomes an identity. The paradox of the quiet voice. When quiet children finally speak, something interesting happens. People listen. Their words carry weight precisely because they're rare, like carefully spent currency. Each sentence matters. But being heard doesn't mean being understood. The quiet child's communication is often indirect, symbolic, thoughtfully paced. Modern conversation favors the snappy comeback, the instant reply. When someone offers a slow, layered thought, The group may not have patience for it, so they learn to compress themselves, to shrink their ideas to fit the tempo of others, to make themselves smaller just to participate. The internal battlefield of the quiet child faces a war inside themselves. On one hand, a rich inner world full of imagination, reflection, complex thought. On the other, a message from the outside world that this inner richness doesn't count unless it's performed. In adolescence, when peers build identity around visibility, social media profiles, likes, attention, the quiet team feels increasingly out of sync. What once felt like depth now feels like defect. The question becomes haunting. Is there something wrong with me? And sometimes the quiet child starts to believe, yes, I am broken. The double-edged sword, here's where it gets complicated. Some quiet children grow into adults who exploit their own invisibility. They take supporting roles, keep ambition small, work in the background, not because they lack ability, but because they were never taught to take up space. But others, they transform their observation into a different kind of leadership. Leadership that listens first, that notices who's being left out, that creates space for other quiet voices, that sees complexity as an asset, not a problem. The quiet person's ability to hold nuance becomes a superpower if they're in an environment that values it. The misreadings that hurt the quiet child is constantly misinterpreted. Their silence is read as coldness. Their thoughtfulness is read as disinterest. Their boundaries are read as walls. Their careful nature is read as weakness. But here's the truth. Quiet children often care the most. They just express it differently, quietly, through actions instead of announcements, through depth instead of display. They care so much that they feel everything in high resolution, which is exactly why they need silence to process it all. What they actually need, the quiet child doesn't need to be fixed. They need to be understood. Here's what actually helps. Validation without performance, welcoming their slow replies instead of filling silence for them time. To process asking open-ended questions, and then actually waiting for the answer roles that honor their nature, making them the recorder of ideas, the observer, the curator, not forcing them to be the performer, translation tools, teaching them to say, I need a moment to think as a normal part of conversation. Imagine if we normalize the 5-minute rule. I'm processing. Give me 5 minutes to formulate my response. That simple shift would transform how we value the rhythm of thought. A hidden struggle, but let's be honest about the costs. Quiet children are overlooked for leadership roles, bypassed in group evaluation, forgotten when making plans. People assume they won't want to come, ignored in conversations until someone else says their idea louder than suddenly it's brilliant. It's a strange kind of invisibility, present and absent at the same time. And that invisibility, it can cut deep, especially when you desperately want to connect but don't know how to bridge the gap between your inner world and the noise outside. Many quiet kids live with a quiet ache, longing for someone to understand without them having to explain. The freedom in obscurity, yet there's also unexpected freedom in being underestimated. The quiet child can move through life without constant performance observed, without being observed, learn, without pressure to prove themselves constantly. Think deeply without interruption, dream without others' expectations crushing. The dream, this is why so many quiet children develop extraordinarily rich inner lives. They have space to think, space to feel. Space to build entire worlds inside themselves. The danger zone, but here's where it gets risky. Silence can turn into self-erasure. If you've been told your voice doesn't matter enough times, you start believing it. If you've been dismissed, every time you tried to speak, you stop trying. If quietness was born from fear instead of choice, it becomes a prison instead of a sanctuary. The quiet child might start hiding not just their voice, but essential parts of who they are. And that's when quietness stops being a strength and becomes a slow disappearance. The transformation into genius, here's something remarkable. Quiet kids often become the innovators, writers, artists, scientists, thinkers who reshape the world. Why? Because they've spent years watching without constantly participating, which means they've had time to actually understand. They know how people move when they think. No one's watching the flaws in systems. Everyone else takes for granted patterns before they become obvious truth, before it becomes trendy. They shape the world not through noise, but through precision. The real power, the quiet child's greatest gift, they don't confuse reaction with understanding. While everyone else is busy responding, they're busy comprehending. While others speak just to fill silence, they hold their words until they matter. In a world drowning in noise, the one who can sit in stillness is the one who sees clearest. What quietness actually means, being quiet, isn't about being less. It's about being more observant, more thoughtful, more deliberate, more intentional. The quiet child doesn't need to shout to make impact. They don't need to be center stage to influence the room. True influence isn't about volume, it's about presence. The revolution we need, imagine a world where the slow thinker gets the first chance to speak. We design classrooms for depth, not just speed meetings, include intentional silence for. Thoughtful responses, we assume depth. Instead of drama, quietness is protected and projected. Not punished, these aren't theoretical questions. They're practical ones that shape destinies. The child under the tree, watching the swings, listening for meaning, they can be guided into adulthood that recognizes their gift instead of punishing it. For the quiet ones, if you're the quiet one, understand this, your silence is not a deficit. It's a malleable strength. It can be armor, prison, or sanctuary, depending on how you steward it. The path forward isn't to erase the quiet. It's to learn how to translate it when necessary while protecting it as sacred. You don't need to become loud. You need to find people who prefer conversation that unfolds slowly, spaces that value depth over spectacle moments, where your precision matters more than someone else's volume, the promise one day. When the moment is right, you will speak. Not because you've become someone else, but because you've found people worthy of your words, and the world will wish it had listened sooner. Because the quiet child isn't just watching the world, they're studying it. And when they finally contribute what they've learned, they don't just add to the conversation, they transform it. In a world that confuses speed for wisdom, the quiet child is a reminder depth takes time, understanding requires stillness, and the most profound truths are often whispered, not shouted.